Maybe they're born with it. Maybe it's sleep deprivation. Oh, this was a bad idea. Hello friends and welcome to a new video. Okay, so full disclosure, this was supposed to be done for June, but every month is Pride Month when you're a big old queer, and Manchester Pride is usually in August, so does it really matter that I took my eye off the ball and lost a month somewhere? I don't know. I'm not your real dad. I was hugely inspired by Morgan Donna's heraldic gown. Have been desperately wanting to make one since that video came out, which is like nearly 3 years ago now. It was finally time to actually make a supportive late medieval kirtle pattern and decide on a design, which, as you've probably guessed, I decided the closest thing to my heraldry was my pride flags. Yes, flags multiple. We'll get to that. Full disclosure, I also mostly forgot to film the process of making these, but I was thinking of them as basically wearable mock-ups anyway, so like, there will be a better video on making this style of gown in future. In the meantime, if you want to make something like this, or indeed almost identical to this, Morgan Donna has explained it far better than I ever could, and that's basically the instructions I followed when making these. I have described this as a supportive kirtle, but on me, fitted is probably a better descriptor. If you have breasts, this style of gown can lift and support your bust in a really flattering way, so don't be afraid of tackling it if you're on the curvier side, but equally I think it looks pretty good on a straighter figure too. It's such a feminine style, I was really concerned it wouldn't work on my body, but I'm actually really happy with the results. So, what is this video other than chaos? Well, it's actually the first of two on two different but connected subjects. This is the fun, friendly video where you get to see a cool finished project. I'm going to talk a bit about gender and sexuality and pride, answer a bunch of questions. Everybody feels good. We'll get back to that second one later. So let's start with the basics. What is Pride? Pride is the celebration and ongoing call to action of the LGBTQ+ community. It is a time where we connect with our friends, partners, found families, supportive relatives, we celebrate our culture, our past, the rights we have won, we honour our elders, we remind everyone else that we still exist and do not have parity in many areas, and we recognise the battles we are still fighting and the work that still needs to be done. If you live in a big city, there's often a march, and depending on where you live, that can feel more like a parade or more like a protest. It's usually both. There's also a lot of like drinking focused events and ableism and minority exclusion and corporate branding and rainbow washing of products, because despite claims otherwise, queer money spends just the same. I say that like I don't buy white Skittles literally every year. Look, Pride is not without its issues, but that's a much bigger subject than I'm equipped to tackle in this video. I'm just a costumer. I'll make a playlist for you with a whole bunch more queer history. What does LGBTQ+ mean? You'll see a bunch of different versions of this acronym floating around, and they broadly all mean the same thing. It can go as short as LGBT, or as long as LGBTQIA+, or some people just find the whole thing a mouthful and say queer, which is the Q in LGBTQ. If we take the longest version of the acronym, you have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and aromantic, and then the plus kind of leaves us open for the fact that we are almost certainly not done, because our understanding of gender and sexuality is still evolving after centuries of oppression and the active suppression of studies and scientific data on the subject, but also this acronym is getting out of hand. What are the pride flags? The original pride flag is the 6-colour rainbow, or at least the original flag that is still in use. 8 and 7-colour versions did exist briefly, but the 6-colour flag is the one that has been used most widely and is most recognisable. There have been a couple of variations to this flag as well. One that you're most likely to have seen in the wild is the progress flag, which adds a chevron to centre trans people and people of colour as the groups under the queer umbrella currently most in need of support and recognition. This flag represents everybody who is not straight and cisgender. If you're still figuring stuff out, or you're moving between labels, or you're just asking yourself some questions, or you identify as any of the things in the acronym, this is your flag. But queers love a colour scheme, so there are more flags. There are a lot more flags. There are in fact flags for basically every identity you can think of, including heterosexual. If you are straight, we made you a flag. Here it is. What this means for a lot of people is, as well as the rainbow, they might have one or more other flags that represents their identity more specifically. Or, you know, in my case, 5. So from the top we have bisexual, grey asexual, demi-romantic, transgender and non-binary. Yup. All of those is me. All of these flags represent different aspects that make up my identity and that need to be acknowledged and protected in order for me to live as the happy, mostly healthy, supported, employed, legally married and in love person that I am. However, I'm sewing a gown and 5 flags is too many flags. I had a bit of soul searching on which of these flags was the best representation of me and which would combine best to best represent my identity, and in the end I kicked demi-romantic out because I don't like grey and green as a colour scheme. Yeah, I know. I'm a bad person. So project-wise, I drafted a kirtle pattern based on Morgan Donner's video. Watch Morgan Donner's video. I'm not going to explain it. It's not that complicated. You can do it. Watch the video. I did some test fittings, tweaked a few things, did some more, tweaked a few things, did some more, went, hey, that's probably fine. Yeah, these don't fit perfectly. I've made some further alterations to the master pattern, but they were good enough. Mostly I just need a bit more ease in the front armhole. I drew up a full version of the pattern, including all the skirts, made the skirts kind of too long, watch out for that, and then it was fun and games time putting all the flags in. So I settled on making 2 gowns, an undergown that would lace up the front, which I decided would be half the trans flag and half the non-binary flag, and an overgown that would lace up the sides and have deep skirt openings for horse riding and sword carrying and, you know, shenanigans, which would be half the bisexual flag and half the asexual flag. I settled on using the regular asexual flag because I was not messing around with pastels and chevrons on top of everything else. I am still under the umbrella, it's still my flag, it's just like got an asterisk next to it, you know. So to make things more visually appealing and make my life infinitely more difficult, I decided that the trans and bi flags would run vertically and the asexual and non-binary flags horizontally. For the asexual and non-binary flags, this actually made my life very easy. I measured the pattern top to bottom, divided it into 4, did a bit of measuring to curve it around the skirts. Job done, same pattern for both. But then there were these 2. I actually stressed out a lot about these 2 flags and eventually just sat down and measured out the trans flag. I measured across the pattern piece level at a bunch of different places, divided each measurement by 5, then marked out sections of 2, 2, 1. So when I did up the side seam with the front and the back, you'd have 5 equal sized stripes across the whole half of the body. And then just as I was getting ready to draw out a whole new set of pattern pieces, I realised the bisexual flag is not equal widths of stripes. There's 2 thick stripes and a middle thin one. So if you tape the 2, 2 sections back together, I could use the exact same pattern, like some kind of genius. By the way, I traced these 2 patterns on either side of the same pattern pieces, so I literally had to cut it up, cut a whole bunch of shapes, tape it back together again, flip it over, and cut it up in a different direction, like some kind of genius. For the record, though, I bought 16 meters of double width polycotton sheeting in 9 colours, and what with the linings as well, I barely had enough for both gowns. Well, I guess it's pride, go big or go home. Keeping track of where each different piece was supposed to go was its own puzzle, and this completely dominated my workroom floor until I got everything sewn together. I actually delayed refitting my workroom until I'd sewn them together because I knew if I moved them, I would mix bits up. I baglined these instead of doing a more historical flatlining because like hell was I flat felling all of those seams. I had to do enough hand sewing as it was, finishing up all the different edges where they were openings, but I did do hand stitched eyelets for the lacing, so you know, maybe it evens out. Then it was too hot to wear it out. Then it was too torrential rain and wind to wear it out. But finally, I scaled back my plans significantly, just put it on and went out in the garden to get some footage of the final outfit. Hello friends, I'm back for the second half of the video. But Ash, this video is already hella long. I know! I don't care. Buckle up, Buttercup. We're doing Q&As before I get to the final announcements. I asked for questions about costuming and or the queer community, and boy did you guys deliver. What's a good first garment that isn't a skirt or a dress? Oh my god, if I see another beginner sewing book that starts off by making a skirt. Okay, so an apron is a great shout. So as a cloak, basically all the same skills as a skirt, but unisex, and you want a cloak, right? Everyone wants a cloak. Pouches and simple bags once you're ready to handle heavy materials like canvas and heavyweight interfacing. Pajamas, next step up but still super simple. If they're a bit rubbish, it doesn't matter because strangers won't see them. After that, I think you should probably look to what you want to specialize in. So if you really want to be a historical costumer, you're going on to rectangle construction shirts and shifts, but if you want to do, you know, modern menswear, it's maybe time to look at a simple waistcoat or a unlined bomber jacket. How do you signal non-binary in your costuming choices? Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that one. One option if you have historical costume to play with is to give clearly mixed signals in the gender of the clothes you're wearing, but wow, you really have to mash them together until people get the hint that you're not a tomboy, or just playing a woman, or just playing a gay man. Another option is to take out as many gendered markings as you possibly can. This works really well for sci-fi, and go for something a bit alien and constructed, like, do I actually have a body, or am I just a swarm of bees wearing this androgynous structure of brass and silk? We just don't know. The other tip I actually got off TikTok, which is you take something that is clearly associated with one gender, and then you add a layer on top of that that is traditionally associated to the other binary gender, and then you add an inexplicable third layer of either gender, where by any right mind there should not be another layer. And then accessories. I don't know why it works, but it kind of does. What trick of sewing looks really complicated but is actually simple and makes stuff look great? Answer one, hand finishing. I know it takes some practice, but use the smallest needle you can comfortably hold and work from there. If you think it's going to look garbage if you shove it under the machine, it will almost always look fancier if you do it by hand. Answer two, some kinds of patchwork are really forgiving but people think they look wild. Case in point, my fragile coat, which has two different kinds of really basic patchwork, both of which look awesome. Answer three, bias binding. You can make your own bias binding out of the fabric used for the rest of the project. It's the easiest thing in the world, you don't need any special tools, and it looks really neat and professional. What are some of the things the costuming community can learn from the LGBTQ+ communities and vice versa? So, big general sweeping statements here. The queer community is by definition diverse because you don't choose to become queer, you just are. And at some point, you're probably going to want to talk to some other queer people, right? And yet the queer community still struggles massively with racism, sexism, transphobia, ableism, classism, the list goes on. Now, you choose to become part of the costuming community, right? You have to look at this hobby and choose to get involved and choose to invest the time and effort and money to build up your skills and go to events. And the costuming community is not that diverse. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that's a problem because everyone here chose to be here, right? In the abstract, and wasn't influenced by any other factors like gender, race, lack of role models, income inequality, disability, whatever, right? So if the LGBTQ+ community is diverse fundamentally and still having all these equality issues internally, what makes the costuming community think they're doing great? You know? In terms of what the queer community can learn from costuming, costuming offers a very different perspective on history than what you learnt in school, probably. You're still being aware of big dates and battles and kings and industrial movements, but you're zeroing in on the differences that made to people's lives, sometimes very specific people at very specific times, and on a subject that wasn't actually widely recorded. You develop a way of researching and understanding history as a subject, even costume history as a subject, that makes you go, okay, yeah, that's what happened, but that's not the end of the story. What about everyone else? What am I missing? What don't I know? We've got there over time, like we're building on the work of pioneering dressed historians in the 60s and 70s, but I don't think queer history has quite got to the same saturation level yet. Queer history can sometimes be presented as, you know, here they are, the 6 gay people in all of European history, pick which one you're going to fanatically over-identify with. It doesn't have to be like that. Queer history is rich and broad and plentiful, and queer historians are now really digging into that. There are some great projects out there. I'm going to put a card up to the time I talked to James about the Historical Crossdressers project because you should all check that out. It's great and it's not the only one, but I feel like a lot of average non-history orientated queer people are still like, Anne Lister, James Barry or Oscar Wilde, gotta pick one because those are my options. No, you've got a history, it's there, it's just been ignored a long time. And we're starting to bring it to light, and you can look to another discipline of history that's very visibly getting past the people saying that's not real history, there's no point studying that, there's nothing there, and see where we've got to. How is costuming a character for an online role-playing game different from an in-person LARP? So I'm assuming this refers to the games that are played on video over Discord or Zoom or whatever, because that makes sense. A LARP costume has to look good from all angles. You have to think about comfort, movement, durability, weather conditions, if you can put it on in a tent, if you're going to have time to do this every morning, what happens if you're running late to the event. But that gives you so many more aspects to play with, including that you can mix big bold strokes to be seen from very far away with very small details that are only visible up close, and you can work across all of your senses, not just sight. On a video call, people are only seeing this much of you, it's probably only this big, and anything other than visuals is not going to come across, except I guess sound, but don't incorporate sound into your costume in a way that's going to affect the flow of the game, okay? No background music, don't attach bells to yourself. If you're going to use a voice changer or something, test it and be prepared to drop it if people can't understand you. So you only have a small space with which to work, and details that are too small or too big just won't read, so there's some serious limitations there. However, you don't have to move. Your costume will never be seen from any other angle. You can temperature control your space. You have lots of off-camera areas to hide color-changing light bulbs, switches for different effects, ultraviolet lights, a fog machine. Your whole costume can be body paint and artfully draped fairy lights and garlands on top of a t-shirt. You can attach yourself to strings like a marionette that just go off screen. You can build a halo out of cardboard and hot glue and just prop it up behind you. Or you can do none of that, roll out of bed 5 minutes before the workshops and chuck a scarf over your messy hair because you know exactly how long you have to get ready, and you have access to all of your stuff because you don't have to travel. In-person LARP costumes have more limitations, but you have a bigger variety of aspects to work with. Online games, you can basically only do one thing at a time, but that thing can be as wild as you can imagine and bodge together. If I'm a sewist and I realise I'm queer, where would you point me? What if I'm queer and I want to get into sewing? So these are actually broadly the same answer going in different directions, so bear with me if this gets muddled. Firstly, education. You're already in a great place with YouTube, but if you prefer books or in-person events or classes, great, dig in. At first, you're not going to know what you want to learn more about specifically, so learn anything you can. Not to mention there's also a ton of queer content on streaming services like Netflix. Yes, I'm sure someone has already told you to watch Paris is Burning and Pride, but you know, for the one person who didn't already know about them. Second, community. Look for other people like you to connect with. That might be in person once the plague time ends, or it might be online through a forum, Discord server, Instagram, Facebook group. Go to events, talk to folk, reach out, ask questions. If people are dicks to you, screw them, they're not your people. There's plenty more that aren't dicks, go find them. And finally, joy. Whether you're exploring your queer identity and the overwhelmingly depressing slog that is LGBTQ plus history, or you're putting pressure on yourself over your sewing ability in that upcoming event, you need to find space to feel joy. Maybe it's showing off your work on social media, or reading a fantasy novel with some quality gay rep, or maybe it's having a photo shoot of your latest project. Maybe it's watching drag queens against a green screen totally fail to stay on topic. Maybe it's walking out the house in a garment you made, or maybe it's just spending your lunchtime watching silly gay memes on TikTok. Just remember to find joy in what you do and who you are. Also, watch out for transphobes on both sides. How would you go about incorporating historical queer fashion / subcultures / signals into your costumes? So this is really interesting to me because a big part of queer signaling and a big part of costuming, particularly but not exclusively at LARP games, is recognition. You are speaking a language, and the point is that other people who also speak that language will understand you. So it can be great to research the 18th century and discover that a certain fashion among men was considered vaguely queer-coded, and I definitely think you shouldn't separate the aesthetics from the coding. Like, if I'm going to use that visual language, it's going to be to portray a queer man, or a queer man might use it because it resonates with him, not just because I like how it looks or I want to portray a heterosexual woman but she's into the aesthetic, you know? And this is difficult the further back you go because things are often not this clear-cut. It's normally far more vague. Are these newspapers mad about women wearing masculine scarlet waistcoats while riding because they're manly and possibly gay, or because they just hate women having independence? But you also have to accommodate for the fact that a modern audience might not know this is queer coding. So on the one hand, you can't rely on it in quite the same way you can rely on modern queer coding like the drag aesthetic, and that might not be an issue. Maybe it's there for you and your experience. Maybe it's inadvertently something that still seems queer. Fancy historical menswear, for some reason, really queer-coded in the modern day, no matter who's wearing it. But also you need to maybe be prepared to do some educating. So when after the game someone's like, I really liked your kit, you can go, thank you, it's based on what the 18th century thought a queer man dressed like. I chose it for these reasons. Not so much because you're going, this is my aesthetic, you're not allowed it, but because you need to say this clothing has meaning, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Honestly, that's true of a lot of historical clothing. This is just a really good example of it. Haha! You are back to sleep deprivation, Ash, because I didn't write an outro for this video until just before I did this recording. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it's been a bit all over the place, but what do you expect by this point? And finally, the second video that's going to follow this one. While writing this video and answering all the really good questions that I got, I found I had a lot more to say on one specific topic, which is costuming and costume events are not all that welcoming to trans people, and in some cases are borderline or actively hostile. So the next video on this channel is going to be all about how that happens and how we can do better. I do not expect it will be a particularly fun one, but I hope you stick around for it anyway, because for obvious reasons I think it's really important. Until then, dream big, and I'll catch you next time. There is a strange cat in the garden and Thursday is doing absolutely nothing about it. Good to know. Oh, and Heidi's chasing butterflies, or flies, or some kind of insect. And it's being watched by another cat, who is being watched by Thursday. Fractal kittens. Okay, focus up. It must be so hard being transgender. Well, there are definitely some societal issues that need addressing. Like, you must just deal with so much harassment and abuse. You're so much more vulnerable than regular people. But don't worry, I'll protect you. So that's why I think it's really important to have conversations about your mental health, you know? Cool story. Are you trans? I don't have a problem with it, I just want to know. So this is Matthew, this is Sharon, this is Emily, and this is Ash. Whose pronouns are they, them? Have you seen the new project from famous Instagram? I love her work. Oh, do you like them because they're trans? Is she? Oh, yeah, it's pretty obvious. Like, if you look at the length of their fingers in relation to each other, they were definitely assigned male at birth. Not that I have a problem with that. I love trans people. Oh, I think they went over to the ice cream stand. I just think it's so great you don't assume pronouns. So I've been researching this historical figure who may have been transgender. They're not trans. Trans didn't exist back then. Well, you know, they've written about their experiences and feelings in a way that's very, very similar to modern trans experiences, and I just think it's worth exploring the idea. Why are you erasing gay people? Oh, and can I get a vegan sausage roll as well, please?
Sure thing, ma'am.
Excuse me? They are not a man. They are non-binary and they use oh my god.
Ma'am, this is a Greg's.
I can't believe you're trans. You're prettier than I am. Hey, can I just check I'm using your correct pronouns? Thank you. I use they, them. Okay, because that person over there used he, him, and you didn't correct them. I think I'm going to play a male character in this next game. Oh, cool. Only obviously he'll be a trans man because I don't look like a man. Oh, so you know about period cramps. Interesting, interesting. Hello, friends. Are you cringing right now? Because if so, welcome to my life. For the record, while I have paraphrased and simplified, changed some minor details to protect people's identities, and why not all of these things have happened to me personally, I have not made up any of these scenarios. They're all real. Some of them have happened to me quite a few times. Whether it's historical costume, cosplay, live action roleplay, or any of the adjacent spaces, it's sometimes not a great experience being transgender in these communities. And it's got to the point where we really need to talk about how we can do better. And in some ways it's great that this video is mostly about tackling microaggressions that make an uncomfortable space, rather than trans people being actively and directly excluded from events, although that does still happen. But the sheer volume is kind of overwhelming. If you think your community is inclusive and welcoming, but you recognised any of those snippets at the front of the video, we've got work to do. I should also make it clear that while I had help working on this video, this is not the be-all and end-all of trans inclusion. I cannot speak for all trans people, or even all the people who worked on this video with me. This video will not magically solve all of your problems or answer all questions, and there is not one font of wisdom that will give you the correct way of doing things. Everything that follows is my opinions, based on the things that I have experienced and understand to be common issues. Do I need to be inclusive of trans people if there are no trans people in my social circle? I'm so glad you felt like you could come along, because we have no queer people in the group. And we're really trying to be inclusive, you know? I'm clearly going to say yes, but let's just take a step back from this question for a second. How do you know? People, and I don't just mean cis people, a lot of trans people do this too, people are obsessed with the idea that they can tell. They are welcoming and inclusive of trans people, they support trans rights, they do the work, it's just that they can tell. They can obviously tell who was assigned what gender at birth. My friend, you cannot. Some trans people choose not to widely disclose the fact that they are trans once they feel they've completed their transition, and in many cases, they pass as a cis person in social situations. There are also people who are just starting to figure things out, or people who are non-binary and genderqueer who don't fit the idea of what a non-binary person looks like, don't get me started, who often don't disclose the fact that they're trans except to close friends because it just makes life easier. And that's just two possible examples. There are trans people in your social circles, there are trans people in your groups and societies, there are trans people at your events. There are trans people everywhere, and you often cannot tell who they are. So move forward on the assumption that trans people are already there and they should not need to disclose the fact that they are trans to you in order to be treated fairly and with respect. Use inclusive language. Okay, ladies? Have you ever seen someone address your sewing group, cosplay group, Facebook group as ladies? Could you not? Just don't do it. Like you're not just even creating a hostile environment for trans people here. Do you ever wonder why there aren't more men in crafting groups? The worst thing is when there's one and it's like, hello ladies, and also you, Mike. Ugh, so weird and cringy. Inclusive language doesn't mean you ignore everyone's gender and treat everyone the same. If someone says to me, hey, I'm a woman, I'm not going to go, okay, body with breasts. What I'm also not going to do is hold up a sewing pattern and go, this is shaped to fit a woman, because not all women are the same shape and not all people who are shaped to fit this pattern are women. Also, hi folks, hey everyone, hello friends, hi guests. It's really simple, often even easier and quicker than saying women or ladies and gentlemen, which, while sounding lovely and old-fashioned, explicitly excludes everyone who does not fit under a system of purely binary gender. Pronouns. Hi, I'm Lucy. Hi, I'm Ash. What are your pronouns? They, them? Oh, great. I was worried you were going to say something like, I don't use pronouns. Most people have got the hang of the idea that you shouldn't assume someone's pronouns. This is mostly just to add some nuance to the situation. Firstly, I see a lot of helpful infographics floating around that are just like, ask people their pronouns. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying don't do that. It's just not always implemented that well. Because a lot of people still do assume people's pronouns, including my personal favourite, looks like a girl but not feminine enough to be a proper girl, has an undercut and or wears a plaid shirt. They, them, right? Which means that they only ask you for your pronouns if they're not sure, which means you did something weird and they think you're trans, just not very good at it. In a work environment, if you're introducing someone on a panel, if you're giving someone a shout out on your YouTube channel, if there's some kind of formal framework, absolutely, you should ask. If you're friends or colleagues and you're going to have to interact a lot, you need that information. That's a conversation you can have. But if you're meeting for the first time ever in a busy or relaxed social situation where it's not necessarily that you know right now what pronouns they use, offer your pronouns, make space for them to do the same. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Lucy. My pronouns are she, her. If you're asking your participants for their pronouns, make sure everyone knows that you're asking everyone. If you're making a Google form, include a dedicated space for putting your pronouns. Don't make it mandatory. Some people are going to be weird about it for transphobia reasons, but also some people aren't ready to come out to you yet. Some people will just not want to be the obvious odd one out if they don't know you yet. Or maybe they're still figuring things out and all you're going going to do by forcing the issue is get them to lie and make everything more awkward later, something I'm very familiar with from personal experience. So don't insist people give their pronouns, but ask everyone. If you're happy and comfortable in your own pronouns, especially if you are cis, introduce yourself with them, put them in your Instagram bio and email signature, wear a pronoun pin. Normalize these things so it's not just the trans people doing it. Finally, I see a lot of advice saying correct people if they misgender a trans person. To be clear, that's a great thing to do and a huge help. And if it's a person who's very openly trans, like Elliot Page, Abigail Thorne from Philosophy Tube, I guess me, absolutely do that. If it's your friend who's just come out to you, check with your friend that they want that and are comfortable with that. Some people in some situations really need that advocacy, some don't. And that's not your call. Also, some people change pronouns a lot, and some people use different pronouns in different social circles or aren't out in all areas of their life. Don't accidentally make things worse by assuming that you need to white knight your friend at every possible opportunity. Ask them if they want it, when they want it. Make it clear that they can update that at any time. Misgendering. I just wanted to say that I think it's so great and so brave that you cross-dress at these events. I'm not cross-dressing. Okay, sure. On a related note, misgendering. This is referring to someone as the wrong gender in any capacity. Everything from using the wrong pronouns or title to assuming this person is going to be using a certain set of facilities based on what you think their gender is. Also, yes, if your sewing group includes a trans-masculine person, addressing the group as ladies is misgendering that one guy. I am not going to drop this point. Deliberately misgendering someone is horrible, but accidents happen. And especially in a big group or a big event, it might be that someone doesn't know or just slipped up. If someone gets it wrong and it's okay for you to do so, correct them. If you get it wrong, correct yourself. If you get corrected, take it on board and use the right pronouns going forward. Don't make a big deal out of it. And definitely don't roast people for one slip up. It benefits nobody to make this into a huge drama. Roast people when they consistently get corrected and don't change their behavior. Names. Hi, I'm Ash. Have you paid? I can't find it. Right, sorry. It's that one there. Wow. Okay. Why is there a different name on your PayPal account? Trans people often change their names, and obviously you should use the name a person wants you to use. Depending on how and when and where they live, that name might not be reflected in all aspects of a person's life, usually paperwork. Running an event sometimes gives you access to people's personal data, and that can include things like ID, vaccine records, or my personal bugbear, PayPal, which is in a different name to the one this person is actually using. If you have access to this information, the onus is on you to be as sensitive and understanding as possible, which effectively means you act as though that piece of identifying data is in the right name, you update it in all your records if at all possible, and not only do you never use or acknowledge the old name, you don't tell anyone else that there is another name or that you know what it is. I am so done with people joking about how they've seen the name my PayPal is under. If a mismatch of names is going to be an issue in any way, always look for a way to discuss that sensitively and in private, which probably means give people the opportunity to get in touch via email or something beforehand. Don't expect people to answer questions about it in front of the whole group, and don't get to the event and drag that person off on their own when you realise that something here doesn't make sense. Both of those are humiliating and inappropriate. Unnecessary gendering. So I combined this style and this style because I wanted a more gender fluid take on this century. It's not historically accurate. Well, probably not, but that's not the point. It would have been better if you stuck to one gender, then it would be more historically accurate. Have a think about the kind of events that you run. Historical costuming, for example, absolutely loves a ball, and you can see why. But a ball is the worst possible event for me. Gender roles are heavily entrenched in every part of this, from the dancing to the costumes. Does your event crown a king and queen of the day? Do you have girls versus boys activities, colour schemes, or just use that as a convenient way to split the group? Do you bar women from the battlefield? Or do you just require a certain level of historical accuracy that doesn't accommodate changes to heavily gendered styles? Do you use gendered historical terms like prince or sir for certain game roles? Even just picking a specific era that you're theming this event around can cause issues. Victorian events for me are a very binary choice. Do I want the nice costume that I can sew myself and to get misgendered all day? Or do I want to wear a black suit and not be able to dance very well and probably still get people assuming I'm cross-dressing? But if your event allows any historical era, I can probably find something I'm more comfortable in. That doesn't mean you can't ever have these events. Just think about whether the gendering is necessary, whether you are running other events that are more flexible, or if all your events are heavily gendered, and how you could adjust things to make it clearer that not everyone wearing a dress at your Victorian ball is or wants to play the role of a woman. Don't assume female. So I'm actually working on an 1860s project. Oh, awesome! Crinolines! Because it's a dress, right? You're making a dress. Obviously you're making a dress. Not everybody who sews is a girl. Not everyone is making a dress. Before you jump in with, oh, I love gowns from that era, or she looks so good, take a second to consider how awkward it's going to be if the person has to go, I'm making a man's costume, or I'm not a woman. And if you don't think that's awkward, trust me, it's awkward for them, because you've just established that you thought they were one of the group, but actually they're weird and different. It takes 2 seconds to say something gender neutral, or just ask, oh, I love that era. What are you making? Don't be weird.
So, look normal. Look more normal, more normal. But relax.
Gender is a very personal thing with a lot of baggage. A lot of people have their own complicated relationship with it, even if they're cis. The way this manifests is often people just saying the most bizarre things you have ever heard, focusing on the weirdest details, making awkward, generalized statements. So this is one of the hardest ones to articulate, but the short version, take a step back and think to yourself, would I say that to or about a cis person? Or would this be inappropriate to say if I was talking to a trans person? And if the answer is no, or even I'm not sure, don't say it! If someone is like, that's a weird thing to say, apologise, think about it, don't do it again. Just be normal. Photo etiquette. Does anyone mind if I post this to Facebook? Can I see? You look fine. Okay, but can I see? See, you look fine. Okay, sure, post it to Facebook, but please don't tag me. Oh, whoops, I already tagged everyone. Can you untag me? I'm not sure how. So you go to an event and you have a great time, you feel cute, your outfit is on point, you have so much fun, you spend time with your friends, you meet new people, you make new memories, it's all great. Then a couple of days later, when you're still riding high on all the endorphins of it all, the photos come out and you look terrible. You look ugly, you look the wrong shape, your skin is a mess, but more than that, that's not you. The person in those photos is not the person you felt like you were in the moment, but is that what everyone else saw? Is this what you actually looked like? This is the permanent record and all you have is your own memories. This happens to me a lot and there's nothing you can do to stop it happening, but one of the things I would really like to see is people in general being a bit more sensitive and understanding about how we handle photographs and video. Now, if you're from the UK or International European LARP community, a lot of what I'm about to describe is just the way things work, but outside of that rather small community, I find it often doesn't happen this way, and that's something we can improve on. Ask people if they're okay with being photographed and respect people if they say no. Get permission before putting those photos on the internet. Be specific about where they're going, who's going to see them, if people want tagged or not. Don't tag others without their express permission. If you're the official event photographer, bring both of these things up before the event starts. If someone asks you to take a photo of them down, do it. If you need a photo of someone for an event page, a shout out, a video, ask them which one they want you to use. Yes, I notice when you choose the one pre-transition photo of me that you can find. You didn't know that's what it was, but I did. There's a bigger conversation to be had about presenting trans people when those trans people are not comfortable with being photographed or perhaps want their faces or names removed. Is it okay to have photos of everyone at your event except the trans person? Is it okay to present pictures of a trans person in a costuming context from the neck down as this body in the abstract? Is it okay to have a trans person in images but never name them? I don't have clear answers to this, but I am sure that the way forward is to always centre this discussion on what the person specifically wants for themselves and to support them in whatever choice they make. Stop hitting on me. Oh, so you're not a woman? No, I can see why the corset and petticoats would be misleading, but no, I am not a woman. That's super hot. Like that you dress like that when you're not a girl? Really sexy. Totally hot. Look, I know I'm hot, but don't say that to my face, you complete stranger. Whether it's describing a person in overly sexualized ways or talking about trans bodies in the abstract like there aren't people attached to them, or somehow implying that this trans person is doing a good job at being trans because you would like to have sex with them, can you just not? Now, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with being attracted to a trans person. My partner is cis. It's worked out extremely well for us. Implying that there should be something wrong with that it's noteworthy that you're attracted to this person in spite of or because of the fact that they are trans, that's creepy. There is a difference between being attracted to a person who is trans and being specifically interested in trans people. Talking about specific aspects of trans bodies in a sexualized way is weird and fetishy, and my value in society is not determined by how much you want to fuck me. Well, I hope you've enjoyed is probably the wrong word, but I hope you appreciated this video. As always, there's a link to my Ko-fi in the description if you'd like to show your appreciation via the international language of money, because boy was this tough to write. And on that note, I would very much appreciate it if, whether or not you were able to contribute financially, you shared this video around, because YouTube has a habit of burying trans-related stuff, and for obvious reasons I think this one's important. And I'll see you next time.
Gaudily decorated with a full allowance of bows and streamers of flame-coloured ribbon.
It is quite an upper class item of clothing because it implies you have other clothes.
His face was pale and ghastly and indicated late nights and debauches, which is definitely someone's Twitter bio.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am joined here today by my wonderful friend James, joining us from the Gender Community Lending Library.
You got it.
There we go. James has very kindly agreed to come on the channel to talk to me about the historical cross-dressers map that the GCLL is putting together. And we're going to explore some of the clothes that people have been wearing throughout history and how that's been recorded.
So Gender Community Lending Library is an online postal transgender library, which basically means you find us online at the link that Ash will no doubt put below. Am I doing this right?
Yeah,
below.
Absolutely.
Navigate to below and you will find a link to a website where you can look at our book collection and you can fill out a Google form, and then I will send you books for free. We have a massive, at this point, range of transgender books. We have a huge shipment of fiction coming in this month, and we are very, very excited. So please borrow books from us. We also do a public history project, currently just the one, which is right now focusing on historical cross-dressers between about 1750 and 1850. So I figured we would talk about that because you, Ash, although like so few people know this, you are basically like my Bible. Like every time I come across something in the archives and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about, I say, hey Ash, what's a sack coat? Ash, what's a tippet?
And lo and behold, these are things that I sometimes know, or at least know where to look up.
So I have brought my prompt card. I have examples of cross-dressers, mostly from the 1840s, who were documented in newspapers. And the newspapers quite frequently were really into discussing what they were wearing. And I thought you might want to go into some detail about that.
I feel like your audience might know this, but my audience might not necessarily.
Sure.
It's the map of historical cross-dressers. Why that terminology?
Basically because, as today, there are loads of reasons why you would cross-dress. And the reason it's notable enough to appear in newspapers, which are my primary area of research, if only because I'm stuck in my home during lockdown and I can't go to any little local archives. So the reason that it's notable is because it is cross-gender behavior. It is men acting as women and women acting as men. So it's a basic descriptor of people's behavior without saying this person was queer or this person was trans. You might notice I say that about some figures, and that is not like me with a historian hat on. That is because those stories are very resonant with modern trans people, and these are people who lived for years or decades as their chosen gender, and they picked out a new name and they picked out a new station in life, and they really invested in that new persona and often went to enormous length not to go back to the gender they were assigned. When we talk about cross-dressers, that can be those people who I call proto-trans or just trans. And it can also be people running away from the police or people who go to protests. And this was a big thing, like for about 500 years, is that people would go to protests in drag. Men would dress up as women to go to violent protests against, say, landowners. So I don't think most people realize, but the Luddite had a wing called Lud's Wives, who were essentially a drag troupe They would go in dressed as women to smash up machinery. There are loads and loads of reasons why you might cross-dress that are nothing to do with queerness. And so I don't want to assign it that label, even though I say that I'm looking at things from a trans lens. So I include things that don't necessarily look trans because I accept that people are not going to the newspapers and saying, you know, I'm a man. I might have been born a woman, but I'm a man. People don't say that. They'll say, I was doing this as a joke. Or they'll say, I was doing it because I had to get away from my husband. They'll say something like that. And that could be true, but we just don't know.
Yeah, I'll just segue into, we can look at the archives together, by which I mean you can do the research and I will ramble when you bring me specific facts.
So without further ado, I'm going to read out my examples and we can discuss. So this person, I'm not going to tell you much about them. I'm going to tell you that we are in, I think, Northern Ireland, and it is 1843. And they were wearing an old blue cloth coat, black cloth vest, cloth cap, black neckcloth, corduroy trousers, strong brogues, and stockings.
This is obviously someone wearing masculine coded clothing. That is something I might actually want to look up. So they've said trousers, 1843, trousers is right. We are moving out of we're moving out of menswear being kind of knee length and we're going into full length trousers being standard for everyone. If it was a little bit earlier, we could look and go, okay, this person's wearing trousers, which probably means they are working class as opposed to someone more high society. What were the other details? I've just latched onto the trousers because they're great. The stockings is the weird, like, why is this an important?
I find that a lot. A lot of them seem to be wearing both trousers and stockings, and it took me a while to visualize that, but I found some engravings, and it seems at first I thought it might be like knee socks, you pull them way up, but you don't. It appears to be like ankle-high socks that go over your trousers.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're usually patterned, so they're like stripy or spotty.
Right.
Even.
Brightly coloured socks, very much a thing.
We got to do this at LARP. I don't know what LARP, but we have to find a LARP.
There are some really spectacular, like, they're much later, but they're women's stockings that are properly thigh high. And they're in sections of black and red stripes and then black and red floral patterns.
That's incredible.
This is like 1890, spectacular. When they say cloth, they almost certainly mean wool, because that's usually what cloth and wool kind of go hand in hand way into the latter end of the 19th century. In particular, wearing a cloth cap is going to be something that is, again, I'm not imagining it is a particularly wealthy person. This sounds like a working person's dress. I
can reveal that this is indeed a farm labourer.
You would still be expected to be wearing a hat and neckcloths and cravats and various kinds of collars for men were very, very important. Even like showing up with your neckwear undone was very casual. You weren't properly dressed unless you were done up around. That's one of the main places for men that you see that. Weirdly, it's one of the places that women's wear can be a lot more flexible in that at different periods and different times of day, it's more or less appropriate to see more or less of a woman's kind of neck and decolletage. But for men, your collar's done up the whole time.
So what I'm hearing is if I'm like a historical romance hero and I'm, dashing and caught out of sort and like disheveled, then I want my neckcloth undone, my necktie.
Yes, undone. Still on, but undone.
Still on, but undone. Okay, I've got that. Shall we move on?
Yeah, that was a fun warm-up.
Okay, this one's longer, so do tell me if you need me to reread. Dressed in a shooting coat, a drab waistcoat reaching a considerable distance below the stomach, drab trousers strapped down to a gentleman's half Wellingtons, a black neckerchief, hair black, long behind, but trimly cut and arranged. And then later in the article it mentions they also owned a black silk hat and a sack overcoat.
Gosh.
Right?
Okay, so let's do those things one at a time.
Shooting coat.
As far as I know, exactly what it sounds like. So that is a sports coat. It is suitable for wearing in the country. It is quite an upper class item of clothing because it implies you have other clothes.
So I can reveal this is in 1849.
Okay, yeah.
So from my incredible paucity of historical costuming knowledge, I was interested that this drab waistcoat reached a considerable distance below the stomach.
Waistcoats get very, very short in the kind of 1820s, 1830s, and then start to move down to like the natural waist. But they do stop at the natural waist. It's either much later or much, much earlier that you see the very long waistcoats. Basically, they're commenting on that, either saying that this doesn't fit someone. So
that was my assumption, that it was that this person is small, although they're perceived as a man.
This person's wearing something that was made for someone much taller, or they're wearing something that is potentially very old, more than 50 or 60 years old. So that's quite unlikely.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can assume then that this is a gender comment.
Yeah, this is
what I have you for. This is why I need to chat to you. So I'm going to ignore the drab trousers because I don't think that's too interesting. We've covered trousers. What on earth are a gentleman's half Wellingtons?
I think that we're looking at like an ankle boot. That was a thing. Men kind of around this period were wearing more sort of like ankle boots were more popular. Before that, it was basically you would have knee-high boots for riding and shooting and being in the country. And then the rest of the time you would wear very low shoes that were very similar to women's shoes. There wasn't a big distinction between them. And it's really kind of in like the 30s, 40s, moving onwards, that there becomes this real distinction because women's shoes go back to having heels.
So this is definitely something we're going to come to again, because I've definitely got the impression from some of this, and I do have a talking point later, that clothing became, I don't want to say more gendered, because obviously it was pretty gendered to begin with, but that there was an increasing gender distinction around the late 30s, early 40s.
I would agree. That area of history kind of breaks down into three main blocks. So you get 1800. That is the French Revolution, basically, the first French Revolution. You get the Regency, which is the long Regency, goes to like the late 1820s. And then you're moving into early Victorian.
Yes.
And for kind of each of these stages, people who are presenting themselves as men in particular, there's a huge focus on being more manly than the people who came before you. You get several successions of men's clothing going through some quite dramatic shifts, and each shift is considered to be considerably more manly than what was worn before. Right. Interestingly, on the women's side of things, a whole different thing is going on.
I think we'll get to that, because I did have a question I've asked you before that we can do on camera.
What you do see, particularly around kind of the transition into the 1800s, 1810s, is people writing about the fact that they find it difficult to distinguish between men and women with some of the fashions that are being adopted.
Constant letters to the editor, like, what are these kids doing? They're all androgynous.
Yes. Yeah. It's something that kind of comes in cycles throughout history, of people going, basically, I can't tell the difference between men and women anymore because they're all dressing so similarly. This is one of the periods where you are seeing that kind of reaction to, you're moving into a period where people are making a concerted effort to have very masculine clothing and have very feminine clothing.
And I just want to say, for people who haven't encountered the project before, because I've talked about this in great detail on our blog, which is also down below. This was a period of increased gender policing. For example, if you were a crossdresser of some variety and you were caught and brought to trial in the 1820s, which there were no laws against crossdressing, but they would probably call you a public nuisance. It's very likely that a magistrate might say something like, don't do it again. You're a huge nuisance. This is a hassle. It's disgusting. Don't do it again. But we're not even going to fine you. And then you get to the 1840s, and instead you get, well, maybe we'll transport you to Australia for 10 years. Suddenly you have this level of gender policing, and I think it's kind of reflected in the outcomes.
I'm assuming that the majority of these people who are ending up in newspapers because they've had a run-in with the law in some capacity.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily getting a representative sample, but...
Absolutely. So some of these people, the vast majority of the ones where we have descriptions of their outfits, those tend to be ones who had a run-in with the law. So this one that we've just been looking at was actually someone in Manchester who was renting an apartment and was periodically seeing a young man from Yorkshire who may well have been there or his lover. At some point, they attracted the attention of the police, who said that that's a woman in man's clothing. And the constable who felt this way entered the house and basically continuously asked questions until this person broke down and revealed that yes, they had been assigned female at birth, and they claimed to have a lover from West Yorkshire who had come and bought them all these clothing, and that they were being taken care of until they could marry. And the story didn't quite add up, but I do think there must be some level of truth to the idea that their lover was looking after them, because I think they claimed to be maybe the child of farmers or something like that. They were working class, and this clothing all seems quite elaborate. And they were renting without working as well.
They referenced this person having a men's silk hat.
Yes, a black silk hat.
That is a high status garment. That is not something that would be accessible for anyone below like middle class.
Sure.
Probably. That is a valuable piece of kit.
Well, speaking of, I have an upper class example for you, which
Excellent.
Again, this person is assigned female and living as male. I sometimes call these people proto-transgender because very many of them have life stories where they will have lived as a different gender for many years before discovery. So this person, this is incomprehensible to me. A dark linen taglioni coat with a standing collar, light waistcoat, good black trousers, short Wellington boots, and a good black hat.
Whenabouts is this one?
1843.
You get this a lot in costume history where they
Right.
give a name to a fashion, and we're often kind of a bit vague on what that exactly means, and it's not always used consistently. So with enough time and effort and like fashion plates, I could probably figure out more or less what we think that coat would have looked like. It sounds like the kind of thing that this will have been a style that was vaguely fashionable at the time, but was also not entirely typical. So a standing collar is exactly that. It will be standing up around the neck, which is not normally what you would see on coats of this era. They've got something more similar to modern suit lapels. But it's interesting they've said it. So it is a coat in this style that is presumably unusual and considered to be vaguely foreign in some fashion because it's got an Italian name.
That is an excellent guess, actually, because I can tell you the story behind this person is really interesting.
Hello friends, Editing Ash here. My interest was piqued by this Taglioni coat, so I did a little bit more digging. With mixed results, I have found several references to the coat. I found a reference to travellers wearing Taglioni coats in one of the Carlisle letters dated to 1839. I also found a ballad called The Taglioni Coat, which was only cited as pre-1856, and I also found a mention of a Taglioni coat in Joseph Coote's A Practical Guide to the Tailor's Cutting Room, which is a tailoring manual but does not include any instructions for how to draft a Taglioni coat, on the grounds that these several sorts of greatcoats are so differently cut by different tailors that I cannot pretend to describe them individually. Thanks for that, Joseph. And that text is, I believe, from 1848, so it does seem like this was a name for a style of overcoat that was widely in use in the 1840s, but I can't tell you what it looks like because, as it turns out, that's really hard.
This is someone who once caught, and I forget why they were caught. It may well just have been that a policeman was walking by and decided they were cross-dressing. This happens a lot. They revealed, and I have no idea how much of this is true. We almost never know how much of these stories are actually true. They claimed to be the illegitimate daughter of a lord who had been raised across Europe, essentially, by a nanny who had taken them from country to country as they grew up, only for them to, I think, eventually escape and make their way to Britain to find their father dressed as a man.
That's a hell of a story. It's one of those things where, like you say, we have no way of knowing how much of this is true. It would be a very plausible story to tell, to say, oh, well, I was dressed as a man because I needed to travel across several countries on my own, because dressed as a woman, you couldn't do that. Which obviously doesn't mean it's true, but I can understand why that would be the thing that you would say if you were called.
Yeah, again, this happens an awful lot. So people will say, I I only dressed as a man because I needed to travel, because I needed to go to sea, to find my lover, what have you. And sometimes we can't tell. It could be true. It could well be true, or it could be a lie. At other times, it is so blatant a lie that the newspapers themselves say, this doesn't quite add up. Now, going to swap, and we're going to look at people assigned male. And this one was actually harder for me because there are fewer descriptions of outfits. Basically, Victorian newspapers and earlier were entirely fixated on the clothing of people assigned female who dressed as men. So many of those cases have a description of the clothing, even if it's brief, and also a description of whether the person was attractive, whether they passed as male, or whether they looked very feminine. There's a real fixation on appearance. And then when you go in the other direction and you're looking at people who are regarded as men by society but were dressed as women, there is much less interest in what they were wearing.
Oh.
So these ones are a little scattered. I have one from much earlier that I thought was intriguing, though I'm not sure we can maybe work out quite what's going on here. This is an account of someone who scandalously went to church dressed as a woman, and it is from 1773. They wore a suit of light brown silk, as Quaker ladies wear, with a large muff which covered both his arms up to the elbows, and with a fur tippet reaching down to the waistband of his breeches. His hair was built in the form of a tower, such as Sybil wore. His face was pale and ghastly and indicated late nights and debauches, which is definitely someone's Twitter bio.
I wanted like calligraphied on something to put on the wall.
Yeah, I feel like you need that tattooed.
Let's start. We've got a suit of linen, like
Light
Quaker
brown
lady.
silk.
Light brown silk. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, very fashionable for the era. All the way through the 18th century, silk is the fabric of choice for basically everyone. It's the point at which silk becomes vaguely affordable. The reference to like Quaker women is kind of interesting. At various points in history, Quakers wear more or less the same as everyone else, and this possibly indicates this is one of the periods where it was less the same as everyone else.
Right. So what's going on with fur tippets, muffs and fur tippets?
Muffs were very popular in this era, and they were enormous. You have illustrations of women holding them like this, kind of against their stomach where they should be, and they reach down to their knees. Big muffs was a thing. They were very, very fashionable. It was one of the things that people got concerned about in letters to the editor, with the men were adopting them as well.
Right.
A tippet in this era is, I think, something like a scarf. It's decorative, it's very narrow, and it kind of sits around your shoulders and hangs down. I think that's probably what they're describing here.
I'm confused, though, because we also have a reference to breeches, down to the waistband of his breeches. So surely if he has a long skirt, no one can tell that this person is wearing breeches underneath.
That's the bit that's throwing me a little bit, because like I'm sure we would know about it if Quaker women of the 1700s were wearing trousers.
Breeches.
Yeah, that is very much not the done thing. Yeah.
I can't shed any light on that.
There's not even really so in some eras you get women wearing kind of men's breeches or men's underwear as underwear. That is a thing through a lot of the periods where people are like, women didn't wear any underwear at all. Actually, quite a lot of the time we have at least some evidence they were wearing equivalents of male underwear sometimes. The 18th century really doesn't have that. Other than cold, the main reason we have evidence that women were wearing underwear of some kind is to deal with periods. And,
I was going to say.
Yeah. And the evidence we have from the 18th century is that there was a variety of different options, but one of the ones that's been suggested is like wearing a cloth apron, but underneath your clothes and possibly tucked up, which doesn't really resemble breeches in any way, shape, or form.
In any way.
Unless this person's petticoats and bodice don't line up, and so they're wearing them over breeches and a shirt or something.
That might make sense. I don't know.
Hello, it's Editing Ash again. James and I discussed this at some length and just couldn't figure out what on earth they were talking about. So I went on a little bit of a research rabbit hole and found some interesting stuff. I thought I was going to have a really hard time of this, finding specific references to the way a religious minority were dressing in a specific time period. However, thankfully for us, Quakers' Right Stuff down. So we actually have quite a lot of information about discussions that were happening at meetings of female friends and what kind of clothes they thought were appropriate to wear and what things they were adopting and things they were not. So it turns out that dress was a huge topic of discussion for Quakers in the 18th century. As such, we can actually say with some accuracy what they were wearing, which was modest and very plain, untrimmed jackets and petticoats of usually a light brown coloured silk. The silk could be expensive, it could be a very fine fabric, it was the trimming and the details that were prohibited. This actually leads me to believe that the reference to as Quaker ladies wear in this description is not women's dress, but it is the colour of the silk out of which this person's clothes are made, which introduces a whole bunch of ambiguity into whether or not this person is actually cross-dressing. So, James sent me the full text of the report in this paper, which is as follows. St Stephen's Chapel has now become a masquerade house by way of substitute to Mrs Corneli's. Mr F came into a very full house Wednesday last, cold and frosty as it was, clad in a suit of light brown silk, as Quaker ladies wear, with a large muff which covered both his arms up to the elbow and with a fur tippet reaching down to the waistband of his breeches. His hair was built in the form of a tower, such as Sybil wore. His face was pale and ghastly and indicated late nights and debauches. In short, what with spindle shanks, hollow eyes, and affected simpering, he was the most complete macaroni that ever disgraced a British Senate. When this girlish fop, or androgyny, or rather hermaphrodite, entered, some tittered, some turned up their noses, and all except some other reptiles of the same stamp blushed to see the great council of the nation thus polluted and converted it into a pantheon for mincing popinjays. Comment down below if you too are a reptile of the same stamp. But based on that description, we are no longer confident whether this person is strictly cross-dressing, but certainly we can say that they were perceived as dressing in a feminine way, and that there's some gender policing at work here.
Moving on from the mystery of the breeches, I have one last detail about this I'd like to query, which is his hair was built in the form of a tower such as Sybil wore.
So we are in the era of big hair. The 1770s actually is when you imagine the very big 18th century hair, the 1770s is what you're thinking of. I'm not 100% on what the Sybil reference is. It could be a reference to a very notable person in society, because this is also where celebrity culture and fashion kicks off. So you really do see very wealthy elite influencers adopting new fashions and then having that trickle down because people can report on what they're wearing much more easily. So I'm sure with a bit of digging, we could figure out which Sybil they mean.
I had a thought that it might actually, and I don't know if this is just much later, but this does come up later in the 1800s, is that when people are referencing styles of clothing, they often reference famous actors and actresses on the London stage. So I wondered if it was maybe a character in a play rather than an actual person.
Additionally, now I've got it in writing, I was able to do some more research into Sybil, which as it turns out is not Sybil, it's Cybele. As far as I can tell, she is a goddess from antiquity who is literally depicted with a tower on her head. Big hair of the 1770s was still a thing, and kind of a very feminine coded thing, so it doesn't hugely change what we're talking about. It's just that that specific reference, as it turns out, is a classical one, because apparently newspapers of the 1700s were incredibly pretentious. Back to the conversation.
I have a couple more proto-trans-feminine examples for you. One is working class and one is middle class.
The working class ones are bizarrely the hardest, because
the working class ones, this was the only description I had, and it's not the full outfit. People just didn't seem that interested in working class women's wear. So, a Tuscan straw bonnet, gaudily decorated with a full allowance of bows and streamers of flame-coloured ribbon and a black lace veil.
When is this one from?
1841.
1840. Oh, blimey. Okay, so...
Oh, one more detail. We are in Dublin, and I know that fashions might be different there.
I was going to say the 1830s and 1840s were big into their bonnets. So much so that actually from 1850 onwards, they start moving out of fashion. And by the time you get kind of 20 years down the line, you're very much into women wearing hats rather than bonnets. These bonnets were big, and also conveniently, they were very kind of forwards. Women's dress used veils a lot.
This is a good question. This is a kind of a big deal in terms of studying cross-dressing in the period, because a lot of the people who now, if you just hear the bare details, you'd say, surely that person was trans. What they were actually doing, based on the sheer number of them, is, as far as I can tell, there was a tendency for male criminals to wear veils and bonnets and dress as women in order to escape the police.
Women in the era would wear veils for all kinds of reasons, everything from it keeps the sun off your face. Women would wear veils while riding because it stops bugs and dust from getting in your eyes. This is less likely given the description of the other things on the bonnet. Women would also wear veils in mourning, which was a big deal in the Victorian era. Someone wearing a full covering black veil was basically walking around with a sign going, "Don't talk to me, I'm in mourning." So I can completely understand why this was something that was easy to exploit, especially since, like, veils, that we think of brides' veils as very sheer and very see-through.
Yes.
Kind of the mid-Victorian veils could be made out of wool, so they could be really quite substantial.
That's really heavy.
Yeah. There's quite a few references of women who were in mourning, because that was the main reason that you'd wear a veil the whole time you were outdoors, complaining about how stifling it was and how difficult it was to get around, but it was the done thing. So veil is a great choice if you're hiding your head, as is the bonnet, because it shields a lot of your face. They were very far forward. But equally, because it was what everyone could see, you dress it up as much as you could. And I love that it's got these flame-coloured ribbons.
I have one last example before I move on to, like, my general talking point, which is, again, about bonnets, actually. He wore a black velvet bonnet, veil, and crimson shawl, the falsity of a handsome display of black ringlets being well concealed by a semi-cap.
Is this the 1840s again?
Yeah.
The fashion was for ringlets in hair. You would have it kind of centre parted and down, and you'd have some ringlets at the front. Obviously, not everyone's hair curls very easily. Yeah. Fake ringlets that you kind of pinned in
Easy
were
to
a
acquire,
thing.
huh?
Yeah, they were something you wouldn't admit to, but they were absolutely something that people had, and this wasn't unusual. What else do we have? Black velvet bonnet, very fashionable.
Okay, this is important because this is one of my favorite examples that I have discovered. This is an example I have given a talk on. This is such a good example because this is our teenage trans girl who ran away and tried to start a hat shop as a young woman. And
Excellent.
Unfortunately, she was discovered and deported. She very much got away. She stole some watches from her employer and pawned them to get the money to start her hat shop. She bought her supplies, she rented her quarters, and it appears she had some level of taste in hats. What a semi-cap is.
So basically, you don't want your bonnet directly touching your hair. Before then, it was very much that women would wear a cap of some kind most of the time. Well into the 1830s, women would wear some kind of head covering most of the time, both just because it was societally expected and also because it protected your hair. It's getting less ubiquitous into the 1840s and later, but it's still something people are very much doing. I'd have to do a little bit more research to know exactly what a demi-cap is. At a guess, it's going to be something that will cover enough of your hair that you can wear your bonnet over it, and your bonnet is protected from the oils and whatever is in your hair. It's going to show some of what's at the front.
Your nice ringlets at the front.
Your nice ringlets and your fashionable hairstyle.
Okay, that is the end of my specific example. You've done well. Like, I'm always impressed by the sheer level of knowledge you can bring me about random items of 1840s clothing.
It's often a combination of generally being aware of clothing and the history of costume, but also there's so much we just don't know, isn't easily accessible, that there's a lot of, like, plausible conjecture that comes from knowing how clothes work.
Yes, I can see that.
I'd never heard of half Wellingtons before, but I'm like, okay, so I know Wellingtons was being the boots. That's probably ankle boots.
It's plausible. Yeah. So the 1840s, the reason I have so many examples, I actually had to look this up, is because newspaper taxation was reduced. So what happened is the number of newspapers in the UK like increased exponentially. Everyone who was anyone had a newspaper. And so we just have loads and loads of articles. But the other interesting thing that happened that I think is relevant from your perspective is that it got much cheaper and easier to publish images. So newspapers started having engravings in them. And in particular, there is one called the Illustrated London News, which, oh my God, I'm going to get this wrong. 1842, I think it started being published. And literally its unique selling point was it had an image on every other page. And so from that is where I've gotten anything I know about 1840s costume comes from there.
The overwhelming majority of costume historians are doing the exact same thing. We're digging through what we can get and going, oh God, okay, between this, and this.
I occasionally think about it and I go, well, I know that you see people on the internet complaining about improbable clothing drawn in webcomics or cartoons. And if any of these engravers were also very bad at, say, portraying modern women's wear, my ideas about what they were wearing will be completely inaccurate.
You do see that a lot. It's really challenging as a modern person looking back, because not only do you have to get as far as going, okay, these drawings are clearly not going to be perfect depictions of what they're wearing, which some people really still don't. Some people will look at Edwardian fashion plates and go, oh, look at how Edwardian clothing on women basically makes them look like they're standing at an angle because it's so full in the chest and then filled out at the back, but only from the waist down. It does make people look like this. And the number of people who I've seen going, well, obviously I need to figure out how to make a corset that makes my body do this. And I'm like, have you considered that's not what their spine is actually doing because it's a drawing? Not only do you have to learn that, you then have to learn what for each specific era, based on what they think is what we're going for, what are they exaggerating? What are they not getting right?
Yeah. Okay, here was the point I mentioned earlier. This is an excerpt of a report from 1844, and it brings up a point that I saw in a lot of contemporary reports in this era. On Friday night, a young man, a shoemaker in the Cowgate, dressed himself in female apparel and sallied out into the streets for a lark. His movements, however, were so awkward and unfeminine that his sex was speedily manifest to the passengers. This seems to happen a lot only in the 1840s, that people will say, I knew this person was a crossdresser because they moved awkwardly. What's going on in the 1840s? Why is it so hard to move?
The answer is petticoats. Petticoats, as in a skirt worn under your other skirts, is a thing that you get for the last 400 years of history. However, in the 1840s, a lot of people, you can imagine like Jane Austen style Regency of the 1800s with the very shapeless dresses. And basically from that point onwards, dresses get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's not until the 1850s you get the cage crinoline, so a big hooped skirt to hold your skirts out, which allows dresses to get really, really big, but also holds them away from your legs.
Away from your legs, you can actually move.
Before this is invented, you have basically people trying to get the biggest possible skirts they can, which means they are wearing up to about 7 or 8 layers. At least one of those will be probably what's called a corded petticoat, so it has rows of rope or twine sewn into it to stiffen it. You may also have a non-cage crinoline. Crin is a braid woven out of horsehair, so it's very, very stiff, and they would put layers of that into a petticoat to make your skirt stick out. And also in the 1840s, you get padded petticoats, which are basically duvets. They are literally stuffed with down.
Right. So what I'm getting is no one could move. Women could not move.
There was an art to it. When you start moving into the cage crinoline, the big hoop skirts, there's an art to moving in that, because if you move too aggressively in a cage crinoline, because it's so light, it will swing around and fly up and show off your legs and get caught on things. Particularly of that era, kind of the 1840s, the 1850s, there's an amount of learning that goes into how you move in those clothes that you don't don't necessarily get in quite the same way in other styles.
So if you're suddenly wearing those clothes that you've never worn before, then you're visibly awkward in the way you move.
More so than someone who's wearing them every day.
My final thing that I was like, I have to discuss this with Ash, is the slightly transier thing, actually. Let's bring this back to cross-dressing. Let's bring this back to trans history, which is that I spent all my time while doing this project kind of trying to work out what people were doing to transition physically in many ways. So what people were doing to try and make themselves look more like a person of a different sex, what people were doing to try and change the shape of their bodies, because they didn't have medical interventions, they didn't know about hormones, they didn't have any of the stuff we have now. Occasionally you do come across references. Besides the veils, includes fake beards, which occasionally come up, growing out or cutting your hair. This is kind of a bigger deal, I think, than we think of it as being now. Because this is really referenced a lot in the court records is, oh my gosh, this man has long hair, he's grown it out. It's a big deal. And similarly, piercing your ear to appear female. There is a very, very famous historical trans woman called Lavinia Edwards, who was discovered on her death when she was 25, and she had been an actress. And the thing that really threw the British public at the time is that she had pierced ears. So they felt that this was a male person, that this was a man who had grown out his hair and pierced his ears. And that gender incongruence they could not understand. We have veils, we have fake beards, we have ear piercings, we have wigs, which we covered, and then we have the stuff that's slightly more recognizable, which is a record of someone called James Allen, who died in the 1830s and was again very, very famous at the time. He bound his chest with linen bandages, and he told his wife that he was doing it to keep warm while he labored. And similarly, we have someone who stuffed cotton wool down their dress to appear female. I guess that does raise a question, which is, what is cotton wool in the 1800s that you can stuff it down a dress?
Bizarrely, not a million miles away from what cotton wool is today, in that it would be unprocessed cotton fluff. Hilariously, from the kind of appearing female end, there's way more of this because cis women were doing it too.
Right.
And in a big way, it gets more pronounced the later through the Victorian period you get. There was kind of an understanding that as a woman, your body might not match what the ideal proportions were, and you could just give it a bit of help.
So Victorian stuffed bras.
So Victorian stuffed bras, Victorian hip pads.
Wow, okay.
A lot of this stuff happened. And like I said, it was less prevalent earlier in the period. As you're getting into like the 1890s, it's all fake. Basically, because you're getting into mass-produced off-the-rack corsets and a very exaggerated silhouette. It's more kind of like, okay, I get the corset that fits my waist, and then I pad my hips and I pad my bust until I fit. And then you get your clothes made to fit over that. It's almost kind of, there's so many like purpose-built pads for feminine bodies that we still have like surviving examples of, that it's kind of adorable that someone's like just stuffing cotton wool into their dress.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Even in the period, we had better ways of doing this, but you might not know about them.
Yeah, of course. That's really interesting to me that that's almost not an abnormal thing. That's not like a deviant thing. That is a thing people were doing anyway.
Yeah, it's a thing people were doing anyway, and it's a thing that it gets increasingly prevalent, and it also gets increasingly tolerated the later on the period. So earlier in the Victorian period, it's a bit more like subtle allusions to the fact that you can pad your dresses, which is in of itself a big change from like the 1780s, 1790s. Towards the end of the 18th century, you've got people wearing what are called literally bums to pad out the back of their dresses. So you would have a bum shop. You know, there's a brief fashion, actually, I'm not confident about that. There's a brief fashion in the Regency for wearing a belly pad to appear kind of like slightly pregnant.
Okay.
It's very short-lived. That was a very openly talked about and openly mocked in satirical cartoons thing. And then it kind of flies under the radar again for another 30 or 40 years before you then start seeing like really blatant adverts for you should buy a bust improver.
Okay, this is really interesting to me because I think that's something that comes up now when we
Mhm.
talk about transgender medical intervention is that we say these things weren't invented for us. They were invented for cis people. This cosmetic surgery, it was invented for cis people. These hormones were first used in cis people. And so it's really interesting to me that when you come up against these, I don't want to say more primitive, but these much simpler ways of changing your physicality, the way you appear, they are also not things that were innovated. They're not things that these trans people had to make up on their own. They're things that were already there in their society that they could pick up on.
The one that there is less evidence for is binding your breasts.
That's binding, yeah.
It is one of those things that we don't have a clear history timeline. You have this happening at many different points in history across many different cultures, like even just across Europe. It pops up in different places over like 2,000 years. Again, for cis women as well, to deal with the fact that they might have too much going on, or they might need to do heavy labor and they're not in a fashion style that support heavy structured garments at that point. You get women binding their breasts semi-regularly. So I think this is one of those things that like people do just figure out periodically and go, actually, that's an easy way of dealing with that problem.
That's easy, yeah.
It's one of those things in fashion history that you see coming up again and again, but you can't join the dots to go, these things are obviously connected.
This is directly how this happened, yeah.
It just seems to be one of those things that periodically people go, oh yeah, that would work.
PSA, don't do this at home, kids.
No.
Buy a binder, don't use bandages. It's very bad for you.
One of the things we kind of don't know is where people were getting their clothes from.
Yeah.
There are a lot of misconceptions about how, like, either you're able to buy your clothes in shops and you just walk into a shop and buy them, or you make all of your own clothes. Actually, the truth for a lot of human history is somewhere in the middle.
In between those two things, yeah.
Home sewing is really not a thing in the 18th and early 19th century. It doesn't really become a huge thing until the domestic sewing machine is invented. People were making simple stuff at home. Your basic undergarments, your nightgowns, bed linens, that kind of thing, dresses and bonnets and men's suits, you would be buying from a specialist.
Yeah, because that's really skilled labor.
It's really skilled labor, and it's a lot of work. As fashions changed, you would adjust it, you would maybe take it in and hand it down to the next person in the family, and clothes did get sold on secondhand a lot. Secondhand clothing was a big industry.
Believe me, I know, because I don't think you know this to the degree that a person can know this until you've started using search terms like women's clothing in a newspaper archive and finding hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of newspaper advertisements for used clothing.
It was a absolutely huge industry, and you don't get a lot of surviving evidence, but you can see how stuff was going from quite wealthy people to middle class people to very, very poor people over the course of several decades. We really take for granted that clothing is just something you can buy. Clothing in history was so valuable. Third or fourth hand clothing with a million alterations in it was actually still worth something.
And people were stealing it as well. This is another thing where I get, negative hits where I'm not finding cross-dressers, is that people were constantly stealing clothing. It's one of the most stolen items that you find.
Very portable.
Very portable. People are hanging it up online so you can just grab it.
It's intrinsically valuable. I think it can be hard for people to imagine how you would have gotten hold of clothing, and that is just the answer in those eras, is you buy it from a secondhand shop, someone selling secondhand clothing, or you'd steal it, or you might be given it. The clothes were there and moving around. They weren't necessarily new. Although it would be really interesting to see, obviously, none of the tailor's manuals or like workwoman's guides that we have surviving will ever mention anything like this, but it would be kind of interesting if we could ever find someone who'd like had clothing custom made, but I just don't think we ever will. We've touched on,
I think, all the major things we tend to talk about.
Where people are getting clothes, what specific stuff is,
how they know to do what they're doing.
Historical anxieties about androgyny. I make a point of sharing them every time I find them now, because
You You could do another video as long as this video that was just about that.
I do think it's hilarious that it shows up with clockwork regularity.
Yes, every few decades.
Every few decades, there's this sudden explosion of people going, we can't tell men and women apart easily. What's wrong
going to
with
happen
them?
to our society?
That goes back way past the kind of stuff I do. You know, that goes back into antiquity. We've talked about the project. We've talked about the difficulties inherent in researching the past from a queer angle.
I should give a quick shout out to all my stuff.
Do you want to let us know where we can find you on the internet?
So you can find us at www.genderlibrary.co.uk. And from there, you can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Insta. You can find our Medium blog, in which I occasionally ramble about historical cross-dressers.
I will put links to everything in the description box below.
Oh, also you can donate to us. Please give us money.
Yeah, normally about this point in the video, I'm like, and you can donate to my Ko-fi page. Don't donate to my Ko-fi page.
Don't donate to Ash. Ash doesn't need money. I need money. Ash is going to buy cat treats with the money. I'm going to buy an underrepresented group books about themselves.
I'm going to bring Thursday out here so you can say that to his face. He doesn't deserve cat treats. Thank you so much for joining me. I've enjoyed this immensely. We should do this again sometime.
We totally should. And we should definitely make a LARP video. We should do that.
I have plans.
Oh man. Okay, plans. I'm excited.
And with that, thank you all for joining us, and I will see you next time.
James from LARP, or whatever, my dearest friend James, who is a delight. It will mainly be 1840s. I hope you brushed up on the 1840s. Don't worry, I don't know anything about the 1840s either. I muddle through it, you muddle through it. I can't wait for someone nitpicky to come and get us in the comments. It'll be great.
In which case, we will look vaguely plausible. So I imagine... Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the cat.
We're all distracted by your cat, more or less constantly.
He's a good cat.
Over the past few years, as I've started taking a more active role in trans activism and education, and I'll be honest, a big part of that for me has been learning, because it's not like being trans comes with a handbook. I've had to radically change how I interact with people in the community in general, and I've ended up leaving a lot of groups in that time. Fundamentally, those two things have been for the same reason, which is that people love to call themselves allies, but not only do they not do the work of being an ally, and quite often are slightly transphobic themselves. Not maliciously, just the general background transphobia that pretty much everyone gets baked into their life. They're convinced that they are already the perfect ally, so not only do they not need to change anything, they can speak on behalf of the trans community. Oh god, also ableism. Rampant ableism. As someone who is neurodivergent but not disabled, it's not really my place to get on a soapbox here, but I do feel the need to point out that when you berate and abuse people for not being able to think of something immediately, or getting their sources muddled in a fast-paced conversation, or not responding instantaneously to emotionally charged messages, not only are you not being a shining social justice warrior winning social justice points for beating people in debate, your neurodivergent friends notice. And this is the tip of the iceberg of ableism. I don't expect people who have been wronged to be polite. I do expect them not to actively perpetuate structural inequality. Didn't realise that was a high bar. I can put up with a lack of education and a lack of inclusion purely as a result of ignorance and the kind of run-of-the-mill microaggressions that happen in a group, so long as the group is open to change and improving itself. And a lot of the groups I've been a part of seem to be more focused on congratulating themselves on how inclusive and socially conscious they were, and how many people they called out, and how many people they expelled for not meeting their standards, which, if I'm having to explain that not everybody makes dresses to some of your membership, you have serious work to do within your space before you start coming for people outside of it. Or it's the age-old, why would you bring politics into our lovely hobby space? We just want to sew. I don't think I need to elaborate a lot on why that second one is bullshit, but it keeps happening, so... In summary, if you are going to declare that my existence is political, or my personal favourite, inappropriate for children, You are making a political decision by choosing to exclude me, even implicitly. There is a huge difference between we have minors in this group, so these subjects are off limits in conversation, as they would be in a film for this age group. Although no online group I have ever been in was set up to appropriately safeguard minors, but that's a whole other kettle of fish we're not getting into right now. Stop asking teenagers where they live. There's a huge difference between that, or we're not discussing the general election on this forum because it's international and Discord doesn't handle asynchronous conversation at all, and it's going to get heated. But if you want to form a separate group chat, we're cool with it. And to use a completely random set of examples, please don't tell people you're trans, this is a no politics space. Well, I guess I'll try and use those pronouns, but I'm old and it's hard. It's not appropriate for you to talk about your past experience as other genders. We have minors in this community. Okay, but what are you really? Both these attitudes also feed into why I've become far more reserved when it comes to individual members of the historical costume community. Nobody in particular, just people in general. Because for a long time, I was having those first conversations with people, usually cis women, and they never went well. The basic trajectory of every single one of those conversations went something like this. This person gets called out, usually for something pretty minor, often very gently, not always, but sometimes what people refer to as a call out is some poor trans person being incredibly polite about why this hurts. That person usually, not always, but usually jumps straight to, a trans person needs to come and tell me what I'm doing wrong. And so there I am going, okay, this person has apparently only just encountered the concept of inclusive language and has no pre-reading, has made no effort to educate themselves. We are going to square one and the basic building blocks of what makes a trans inclusive space. And I come in with stuff prepared and talking points and examples, and whoever it is, again, this has been multiple people, I would hazard more than 5, possibly more than 10, just speaking to me personally. This person is like, no, I know how to be an ally. I just need you to tell me what the correct answer to this specific question, or how I should handle this very specific instance. I'm not here to think about broad changes in my worldview. Sometimes with a side order of how bad it made them feel that people think they're not inclusive. I am not the most diplomatic person in the world, and I am not good at conversation with strangers. That's why I have a YouTube channel and not a podcast. And when I don't feel like I can speak honestly, the conversation would just dead end almost before it even began. I cannot be expected to break down your personal barriers as well as educate you from scratch. And as such, I just stopped talking to cis people about trans issues. Unless you've done your homework and are demonstrating an open willingness to learn, to embrace the complex, multifaceted and incomplete nature of trans discourse, to consider the whole breadth of your actions and impact instead of just trying to figure out how to get people to stop yelling at you in this specific instance, I'm not wasting my time anymore. Because I can tell when you don't actually think of me as a whole equal person, and I can tell when you don't actually care. If you're cis, one thing you can do right now is to amplify trans voices rather than use your own. A cis person using their social media to go, transphobes suck, we support trans rights in this house, whenever some new legislation kicks off or someone high profile makes a comment, is always a bit cringy, because I'm like, could you not find an actual trans person to share instead? Do you not follow any trans people? Because whatever issue has just occurred, there are for sure trans people speaking out on it. And if I know trans people on social media, having a variety of nuanced and complex responses. I would much rather people made at least an effort to engage with the complexities of situations and with trans people's honest feelings, which sometimes is going to be ugly feelings like anger and grief. And you paint over all of that and hide us even further when you just go, yeah, transphobes can get stuffed. Unfollow me if you don't agree. Well, second thing you can do as a cis person, delete all the explicitly transphobic comments on your social media. Report transphobic comments when you see them on other people's social media. I don't fully understand the obsession with debating people in your comments section like you're going to win points for your cutting takedown or everyone needs to see how clever and witty you are. But even if that's your jam, debating transphobes in public just reinforces the idea that this is a debate. My existence and my entitlement to human rights is not debatable. If it's neutral enough that you feel you can make a difference by quoting hard fact or linking to good trans educators, do that. If it's just nasty, get rid of it. and get rid of that account for good measure. Shut these people down and give them nowhere to go. Okay, no, if you're cis, there's 3 things you can do right now, and the third is to give absolutely no money to J.K. Rowling ever under any circumstances. That includes not going to Wizarding World. Don't pirate her work and the associated properties, because that reinforces the narrative that horrible trans people are ruining her stuff for all the true fans. Don't use your social media to promote or celebrate Harry Potter stuff, and be conscientious if engaging in fan works. I've seen a lot of people who are like, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because we're reclaiming Harry Potter for the fans, and firstly, every time I see Harry Potter anything, it makes me bone-achingly sad. So I will just unfollow you, and you need to think hard about whether you really want to create a space where some trans people don't feel able to stay. Secondly, if you're not trans, you have nothing to reclaim. As bad as you might feel about the whole thing, it wasn't taken away from you the way it was violently taken away from many trans people. Not everyone, not even many trans people, are going to agree with me on that one. It's very much a personal opinion, not the word of trans God. God is trans, but there's no official single trans opinion. If you are trans and choosing to reclaim Harry Potter stuff, I respect that, even though I still kind of wish you weren't. And I really don't want to watch. Trans issues are messy and complicated, compounded by the diversity of the trans community, which is why not trying to engage with actual trans voices is so harmful. There's also probably other massive transphobes I'm not as aware of, but I'm British and trans masculine, and I've had one of the keystones of my very unhappy teenage years irrevocably ruined. So she's at the top of the list for me. One final thing I want to touch on in the context of sharing and amplifying trans voices on social media is that I think a lot of people have a level of anxiety over either receiving hate or being the reason someone else receives hate. Here's the thing, I'm openly trans on all my social media. That was not a choice. Having a social media presence, YouTube, Instagram, because of how I look, because of what pronouns I use, having a YouTube channel for me went hand in hand with being a trans person on the internet. Because I did not see any way I could hide that I was trans while being that public facing. Like, I could try, but it would have destroyed me, having to lie about who I was to such an extent. The idea that I'm not ready for what the consequences of that is, or that you can somehow protect me by not amplifying my voice, is really patronizing. Receiving hate isn't okay. If you're a trans person on the internet, I am never going to tell you that you just need to toughen up and deal with it. It hurts, and it should not be happening. Use every resource at your disposal to shut it down. Delete, block, hide use from channel. If it's high-profile people, call them out and hold them accountable. Trans people, especially trans people who are public-facing, are going to need support and care. But what they don't need is unasked for shielding and cis people deciding what they can and cannot deal with. That is not respectful. And here's where we get a bit weird and sweeping, because we're into theoretical territory. I genuinely believe that love is infinite and hate is finite. I really do believe that transphobes, real, hardcore, frothing at the mouth transphobes, right now are a small minority. The problem is that they're very loud and very confident and very privileged and have no reason to keep quiet. So there's a lot of people who don't have a strong opinion, who don't have any trans friends, who don't know of any trans people in any detail, and probably have some ingrained, mildly transphobic views, as many of us do as we live in a society. They're hearing a lot of very loud, very confident people who seem to have all the facts, and they're not hearing anyone challenging those views. And bit by bit, they're drifting to the right. Because a lot of trans people, and we're already a really small group of people, okay? The exact estimate keeps changing, but it's single digits percentage of the population. It might even be as low as 0.5%. It's not, but it might be. Are keeping their heads down and trying not to attract attention, or are being discredited for other reasons. Race, political views, religion, immigration status, age. Like, just take a moment to think about the sheer vitriol these prominent white middle-class adults are directing towards literal children who don't remotely have the skill set to deal with that hate. I don't blame anyone who decides to keep their head down. For many years, I did too. But now I'm definitely closer to middle age than I am my teenage years. I have 20 years of existing on the largely unmoderated internet. I have a good support network who affirm and celebrate me, and I don't give a fuck about what strangers on the internet think anymore. I'm ready, let's go. Not everyone, but a lot of openly trans people on the internet have made that exact same internal calculation and concluded, you know what, I can take this bring it. And I've broadly reconciled myself to dealing with a certain amount of hate because deep down, I truly believe that there's a finite number of people writing that hate with a finite number of hours in the day, and every person writing, "You will never be a woman." Seriously, guys, don't get me started, I cannot. On one of my YouTube videos is using up 20 seconds out of that finite amount of time, and maybe they don't get to do the same to the young trans woman who's just started her channel and would find that remark far more hurtful than I do, who doesn't have the support to shrug off the ones that do hurt. The more trans people stepping up, hard as it is, and God knows the last thing I want to do is pressure people to come out, but please be aware that for a lot of trans people, our choices are deeply constrained to either speaking out or being silenced. It means that the transphobes get spread thinner and thinner, and the more cis people who've heard a trans person talk, who watch their videos, follow their content, who know the facts, and who can question the transphobes' poisonous rhetoric. Now I'll level with you. I'm terrified that this isn't how the world works at all. I'm terrified that the well of hatred people have for other human beings is bottomless and will drown all of us. But I have to keep acting like the narrative of hope and eventual triumph is the true one, because you have to fight for the reality you want, and the alternative, even on a purely personal level, is deeply, deeply dark. In the past, I've had people ask before sharing my stuff on their Instagram or whatever, and that's cool. A heads up before your stuff goes in front of the eyes of 100,000 people is, you know, fine. But I think a lot of people assume that trans people on the internet don't want more attention because that leads to more hate. If someone is positioning themselves as an educator or someone who speaks out on trans issues, of which I am the least, don't worry, we've already made that calculation. Amplify our voices. One less positive aspect of this, of course, is when cis people are holding back because they're concerned about that hate being directed towards themselves. And this is where I end up in a horrible catch-22, because nobody should be receiving hate. I can't blame anyone for wanting to avoid it. I'm deeply conscious of the harm transphobia causes, even when it's directed towards cis people. Yes, people make transphobic comments to cis people too. Same rules apply, delete and block the bastards. It's not okay because you're cis, and it's still transphobia when it's not directed at a trans person. And yet, every person who doesn't choose to step up to do the work of being an ally, not claiming allyship, not making empty statements, but actively learning, sharing, supporting, speaking out, and engaging with the ongoing practice of being an ally to the trans community, is one more person complicit in the silence that allows transphobic voices to spread. And that's horrible. That is a terrible thing to say about other members of your community. I know for a fact that I don't do enough with regards to other aspects of activism and inclusion, so I have no moral high ground from which to speak. I don't even feel I do enough for the trans community. And we are all broken and tired and overworked. But while it's ugly, it's also true. I can't make people step up. I don't want to shame them for not doing so. The short version is, it kind of sucks. I totally get why you don't want to do it. I also don't want to pressure people to do more. Everyone has reasons, often very good reasons, why they haven't done more, and there's always more to do. There's never going to be a gold award that shows up and says, yes, you have done enough activism on your chosen specialist subject. The work increases proportional to the number of people doing it. But if you're listening to this and reflecting on your own privilege, and let's be honest, you're watching a YouTube channel on the internet about the hobbies of historical costume and LARP, there's a lot of privilege right there already. If you're thinking, I've realised I'm not doing as good at this as I thought, I think I could do a little more, by God, we need you. Someone once said to me, if you can, you must. And while I mentally tell that person to fuck off on an almost daily basis, often because I've realised that actually I cannot, and it should be okay to say I cannot, but that still holds a level of shame that I'm trying to teach myself I don't need to carry. In this instance, I'm here, and I can, and I am. So, I want to lead in by explaining that, personally, my gender is not fluid, but my presentation often is. And I think people really struggle with that. They want one gender to be the regular one and one to be the opposite. Or they expect everything I do to be somehow an ambiguous mix of the two. In reality, there's a few different places on the spectrum I feel really comfortable, and I bounce between them how I like. But my internal perception of my gender doesn't change whether I'm in Lolita or menswear. On social media, you only get a very narrow view of my life, and in particular, my my normal everyday wardrobe doesn't feature very much. So, on any given day, I can be wearing one of several things. What I vaguely think of as House Goblin, which tends to be my more practical medieval kit, t-shirts and cozy skirts. It's my pandemic wardrobe. The more femme stuff, which is either casual Lolita or, I don't want to say Morgan Donna's SCA wardrobe, but it's getting out of hand. And then there's the menswear, which I have much less of, but I wear probably 75% of the time. I came very late to men's clothing I actually felt comfortable in. I can actually pinpoint the moment it happened. Early in the pandemic, YouTube was like, hey, watch this video. Kind of out of nowhere, and it was on Kinetic Manifesto film Come Prima by BTS. Yes, I know. And that was the first time in my life I was looking at men and going, that's it, that's what I want. That's the masculine version of me. That's what I want to look like. That's where I fit. Not in a creepy Ollie London way. Just now I've started really looking into menswear, having basically written it off as untenable for over a decade. A lot of my style icons now are men of colour doing street styles who are undeniably masculine, but they're doing it with colour and jewellery and nice fabrics. I like those things. Also, because of my size and body shape, I fit nothing made in the UK, and discovering Chinese, Korean, Japanese men's clothing sizing has been a revelation. That aspect of my wardrobe is still being developed, and I'm still figuring out what feels good. One thing I found works really well is saving images of outfits I really like. Like 50% of them are Jimin from BTS, don't at me, I have a problem. And then instead of trying to recreate specific outfits, I'm looking for trends. That's why I've gone for the earrings, because I saw them coming up a lot and my ears are already pierced, so here's something more masculine I can do with that. I really want to try some wide leg trousers because I've tried the skinny fit men's ones and they are not great when you have my waist to hip ratio. A bunch of the outfits I saw have a black polo neck jumper, so that's on the list for this autumn. That kind of thing helps me build a wardrobe rather than just a single outfit. I'm including this mainly as advice for other trans and non-binary people who are maybe trying to figure out their style. It's a good strategy. On the subject of wardrobes, I do occasionally get questions about why, if I can sew and obviously afford quite a lot of clothes, I end up wearing a lot of street style. A lot of people assume I should want to do vintage stuff or like dark academia just because I'm on Costume. And while I can completely see why those aesthetics appeal to people, it's not my thing at all. I had the opportunity to do a lot of vintage sewing over the pandemic and I just didn't. Left to my own devices, I don't want that. I really appreciate that a lot of people are out there finding styles that really reflect them and who they are, and in most circumstances, providing you're not appropriating or co-opting anything that isn't yours, I think that choice about what you personally want your style to be should be a neutral one. It usually isn't, but in theory, going, this is the best reflection of who I truly am on the inside, probably shouldn't come with a lot of baggage. But I think that a lot of, well, often the audience rather than the influencers themselves tend to end up ranking some aesthetics as better than others. And they'll never say better. They'll say more flattering, smarter, more thoughtful, taking more care of your appearance. See how many things get described as more sustainable when they're just not. And when you filter and refine it all comes down to you look posh. In particular, I want to like dark academia, but everyone seems to swing it as, oh, I'm going to Oxbridge on Daddy's credit card. That aesthetic of not just rich, but also classy. And no. I grew up in Oxford. No. I did ask once if a witch's cottage is cottagecore. Cottagecore is not exempt from this. Have you seen how much sulky dresses cost? Are you aware of how privileged it is to be able to access the natural world purely for leisure? If a witch's cottage is cottagecore, what aesthetic is a wizard's house? And the answer for most people was dark academia. And that's the aesthetic I want. But I just can't seem to catch the vibe of Howl Pendragon versus spoilt rich boy in tweed at the Bullington Club dinner. Gross. So I'm not touching it. And I think that's part of my problem because everyone is like, ooh, vintage, ooh, dark academia, that's the aesthetic of Costume. Those are aspirational aesthetics, and they haven't really unpacked that those aesthetics are very heavily associated with weird class dynamics. Obviously, poor people existed in vintage times, and wearing those aesthetics now is not automatically an indication of having lots of money or being upper class. This is largely not directed at the people wearing those clothes with nuance and integrity, but there's layers involved in going, why why do you want to dress in modern street style? Why don't you want a three-piece suit? There's nothing wrong with wanting the three-piece suit. That should be a neutral decision. But when you go, but this three-piece suit is better than what your K-pop idols are wearing at the airport, I think you need to unpack exactly why you think that, because the kind of words people end up using are often deeply classist ones. Now, this whole gender thing ends up a bit skewed on this channel because when it comes to historical and fantasy clothing, I am very, very often in camp high femme. No, really, more femme than that. The main exception being The Witcher. God, if I could look like Henry Cavill as Geralt, I'd be doing that way more often. But in general, I am making dresses or extravagant flowing frilly things. And that is disproportionately what you see on this channel. This, I know, contributes to people perceiving me as female, even subconsciously, because I'm not androgynous enough to be really non-binary. The mental image most people have of a non-binary person is an apparently AFAB white person with short hair wearing masculine clothing. I know what I look like right now, just run with it. And before you jump to reassure me about that, I want you to sit with the fact that it's almost certainly the bias that you also have. There is a huge diversity of non-binary expression, and I say this as someone who quite often fits into that narrow box of what a non-binary person looks like. It would just be nice if more people could make a conscious effort to see me as non-binary when I am in full corset, bustle and petticoats as when I look like this. Now, one way this expresses itself is that the historically correct silhouette is obviously very gendered, and this usually clashes significantly with my perception of my body. It's not uncommon for me to get helpful comments saying things like, oh, you could pad your bust more, you could do this to your body, you could do that, then your shape would be more correct. When I know I could do that, I am not doing those things because it gives me dysphoria. I am not putting this much time and effort and money into a costume that I don't want to wear because it fits the ideal female shape of that era, and that makes me feel awful. So, I want to make the pretty dresses, but I also want to cut them with flat fronts. I sometimes want to wear them with my natural hair. I don't want to disguise my broad shoulders or my complete and total lack of cleavage. And I'm like, I'm making these clothes myself. I get to do that. But there's this perception that I am less historically accurate because I haven't created the right shape. And without unpacking the whole bullshit of ranking people according to how historically accurate they are, trans people existed in the past. Non-binary trans people existed, not just in other cultures that had existing structures for them to inhabit, that still do, but in white Christian Europe. Small digression on the subject of historical trans figures. I really recommend, whether you're trans or cis, educating yourself on people in history who may well have been trans. Obviously, we can't say for certain, but as a trans person, I have found so many experiences that resonated deeply with my own, in spite of existing at a time and place when allegedly those experiences shouldn't exist. I don't think I'd realized how much I lacked that sense of continuity and connection to history that I think a lot of other people experience until I started learning about people like me. There's a 19th century French writer called Rachilde who described their gender as not a woman, but a monster, a werewolf, or a cat. And if I know my audience, a lot of you are like, that's interesting but kind of weird. And then there's like 3 people who are having a whole moment. Right there with you, Sib. For what it's worth, Rachilde's Wikipedia page is a disaster. My friend James, who is the source of a lot of my historical queer knowledge and runs, among other things, a project mapping historical crossdressers, recommends Rachel Mesh's book Before Trans, if this is something you're interested in. But to circle back to talking about bodies, people with my body existed. People with not even dysphoria, just plain old cis people who felt uncomfortable changing the shape of their body in a particular way existed and still do. The whole concept of an ideal figure or ideal proportions for any given era is one I think we need to bury 6 feet under the ground and never speak of again, because saying, oh, but it's not real, it's all padding and support garments, does not make it okay. Not having the right shape bust or waist or hips while wearing all the correct garments is historically accurate, and not having the right silhouette just needs to stop being something we judge people on. Every person who is concerning themselves on whether people are doing historical costume right needs to accept that their concept of what was right in the period is sexist, classist, fatphobic, ableist, and transphobic by design. You cannot separate the ideal figure of any given period from the prejudices that made it ideal. Why are you replicating those incredibly outdated outdated historical attitudes. One final note on the body and historical costuming space. A lot of people in this space are cis women, and I think a lot of people assume that the majority of people in this space are cis women. A significant number of cis women in costuming act like they're in a space that's just women, and a significant number of cis women in costuming talk about their breasts a lot. It's a thing. And it's simultaneously true that as a trans person, that makes me super uncomfortable for dysphoria reasons. And it's almost certainly very misogynistic to be like, could you talk about boobs less? Both of these things are true. I guess what I want to say is, I don't want to police the way that you talk in your space or about your body, but try and think about your audience as being more diverse than just cis women. You may not want to change anything about what you do, but you should be aware that some conversations that are important to cis women and uncomfortable to cis men because of structural misogyny are also going to impact on trans people in ways you may not have considered. You may not want or be able to do anything about that, but I just think people need to be aware that it happens. Here's one specific area that I think people have broadly not grasped as well as they maybe should have, and that's the concept of inclusive language. A lot of you are about to tune out because you know how to do inclusive language, and trust me, no you don't. A lot of people are getting this not wrong, just weird. Inclusive language does not mean you should always try and include the absolute maximum number of people in every statement. A really good example of this is the trend for people to refer to everything as masculine or feminine, including when doing so is actively unhelpful. Let me unpack that in the context of costuming. When you're looking at certainly white Christian European historical dress, it is not helpful to describe those clothes as just masculine or feminine. That culture did not conceptualize gender as a spectrum, it was a binary. If you were wearing a skirt, you were social category woman until proven otherwise. And not only was there diversity of gender expression within those social categories, it's possible to dress as a masculine woman or a feminine woman in any era, there was censure for stepping too far outside the expectations of those social roles or being revealed to not fit the expected biology of that role. When you describe everything in history as just more feminine or more masculine, not only does it erase the experiences of people who tested the boundaries of man and woman. To use some really famous examples, are you going to tell me that Anne Lister wore feminine clothing and Oscar Wilde masculine? If you are, I'm going to assume you don't know anything about how those people dressed and behaved and how society responded to that. It also erases the experiences of historical trans people who genuinely engage with clothing's ability to put you in social category man or woman in spite of their assigned sex at birth, and took great risks in doing so. If this is a man's suit from the 18th century, even if the person wearing it was very feminine, as some men in the 18th century were, they would still be treated as a man, while also facing hate and discrimination for not being the right kind of man. And indeed, if the person wearing the suit had been assigned female at birth, they have made a conscious and risky choice to attempt to not just be more masculine, but at the very least be mistaken for a man sometimes, if not fully present as one. It's not more inclusive to flatten those experiences out of existence. But okay, that's history. We live in the modern day and we understand that gender is a spectrum. If we use the example of a modern reenactor who uses he, him pronouns, he might feel more comfortable describing the impression he's creating as masculine because there's an added level of complexity and nuance to his gender and gender expression that is masculine but isn't purely man. Or he might be a cis man who is very comfortable within the guidelines of what a man is constructed to be in our culture, be portraying a historical person who is also a cis man and who comfortably occupies the period construction of masculinity, and in both cases acknowledge the privilege and prejudice associated with those social roles, in which case it's completely fine to say you're a man and your character is a man. You don't have to make that ambiguous. You can if you want to or you think it's appropriate, but it's not less inclusive to actually say genders. Equally, when talking about your community, a cis gay woman who identifies as butch is not going to be happy about you classifying her as feminine or about you assuming she doesn't suffer from misogyny because she's masculine. Like the word queer, masculine and feminine are deliberately broad and subtle, and sometimes that's what you want, and sometimes it's really not helpful. A slightly clumsy side note, all of this has fundamentally assumed some kind of end-to-end spectrum between female and male, and has not been hugely explicitly inclusive of intersex people. The gender spectrum is more of a colour wheel, really, and wow, wow, everyone needs to get better about educating themselves on and including intersex people, myself included. Intersex people have always existed, and the experiences of intersex people in history are documented and are valuable. So, what is good inclusive language? For me personally, say what you actually mean as specifically as possible without being constrained by traditional ideas of the gender binary. Does this legislation affect women, or does it affect anyone who can become pregnant? Not all of whom are women, and not all women will be affected. Then it's people who can become pregnant. Is this healthcare a good idea for men or anyone who has a prostate? It's people who have a prostate. Is this event for women and non-binary people? Ew. Or is it for anyone who has experienced misogyny? Are the problems in your community regarding harassment and assault largely directed towards women, stemming from masculine people, or is it men? You can say it's men. If it's men, if you don't know for certain that they're all cis men, which you don't, you can just say it's men. It's okay. Man and woman are big, broad social constructs, not strictly biological ones, and sometimes it's appropriate to break it down into cis and trans, or to talk about specific biology, and sometimes it's not. This is part of what I mean when I say inclusive language is not grasped terribly well, and often people think being inclusive just means including more people. It's an easy shortcut to just say, oh, say masculine and feminine instead, when the reality is you need to be deeply mindful and conscious of what you're saying, what you actually mean, often use a lot more words than you're used to, and be prepared to have a whole conversation about whether that was actually the wording you were aiming for and what you meant by it. As a final note, AFAB and AMAB, assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. There is nothing wrong with these terms if you use them correctly. A lot of cis people are not using them correctly. They are not a more inclusive way of saying woman and man. They are trans terminology that belongs to the community and are in and of themselves a little context dependent. Being AFAB is something that might come up in the context of healthcare, but being AFAB does not mean you can or could become pregnant, or are more likely to experience misogyny in a certain way, for example. Being AMAB might be relevant to explain the expectations and pressures placed on you in childhood, but it doesn't mean you were brought up as a boy. You may well have been a girl all along, but placed in that environment of expected masculinity. There is no one unifying AFAB or AMAB experience. Also, you can only know if someone's AFAB or AMAB if they've told you they are, or if you've seen their genitals at birth. I'm guessing 99% of the time you have not. Basically, especially if you're cis, if you aren't certain you mean AFAB or AMAB, there's probably a better word for you to use.